The first thing you learn about asparagus is this. It doesn't make a sound when it grows, but you'll hear it when it breaks. I heard that sound at exactly 6:12 a.m. A soft, wet snap cutting through the morning air like something small, inexpensive giving up. The soil was still dark from last night's rain, that rich, earthy smell rising up as the sun barely touched the tops of the rows. And there they were again, 3 strangers in clean white sneakers, stepping right into my beds like it was a public park. I didn't shout. I didn't move. I just watched them through the screen, the faint hum of the camera system steady in my ears, every angle lit up in quiet green boxes. They laughed, took pictures. One of them even bent down like he was inspecting the spears, fingers brushing over months of work like it was nothing. What they didn't know was that every inch of those rows had eyes on it, every step time-stamped, every face captured in perfect high-definition detail. My name is Ethan Carter, and those asparagus beds you're looking at, they're not just a garden. They're 5 years of early mornings, busted knuckles, and a promise I made to my father before we buried him on the far edge of this land. He used to say asparagus teaches patience, plant it once, and you wait years before you see a real return. Each crown I put in the ground was measured, spaced 18 inches apart, rows running exactly north to south, so they'd catch the full Texas sun. 40 beds total, each one mapped, labeled, and worth more than most people around here realize. That's why the first time it happened, I thought it was an accident. Someone wandered too far off the sidewalk, didn't know better. I let it go. The second time, I put up a sign. Private property. Do not enter. Simple. Clean. Hard to miss. The third time, the sign was gone. Not knocked over. Not weathered. Gone. That's when I started noticing the pattern. Same entry point along the fence line. Same mornings. Same type of people. Well-dressed. Curious. Always looking around like they'd been told this was something special. And at the center of it all, whether she showed up in person or not, was Linda Whitmore. HOA president. Realtor. The kind of woman who smiled like she was doing you a favor while rewriting the rules behind your back. I'd seen her walking groups down the street before, heels clicking on pavement, voice carrying just enough to sound important. Exclusive features, she'd say. Unique neighborhood charm. What she never said out loud, but what I was starting to understand, was that my land had somehow become part of her sales pitch. And every snapped spear, every footprint pressed into that soft soil, was just collateral damage. So I stopped trying to stop it. Instead, I got quiet. Installed cameras low, hidden between the rows, angled just right. Upgraded the system. More storage. Clearer night vision. I didn't need guesses anymore. I needed proof. Because if Linda thought she could turn my work into her selling point without asking, she was about to learn something else about asparagus. You don't rush it. You let it grow. And when the time's right, you harvest everything. By the third morning, I knew exactly when it would happen before it even did. There is a rhythm to people who think rules do not apply to them, a kind of lazy confidence that shows up in patterns. 6:12, 6:15, sometimes 6:20 if the group was bigger. I would be standing in my kitchen, coffee cooling in my hand, watching the monitors glow against the dim light, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirp of birds just waking up. Then the fence line would shift, a shadow crossing where it should not, and right on cue, another set of shoes stepping into soil that took me years to build. You have to understand something about asparagus. It is not like tomatoes or corn. You do not plant it and harvest in the same season. You invest. Each crown goes down nearly 8 inches, spaced carefully, the trench filled in slowly over time as it grows. It takes patience, discipline, and a willingness to wait 3 full years before you see a proper yield. Those beds out there, all 40 of them, represent more than just crops. They are a long game. And every time someone steps into them, they are not just crushing a plant. They are damaging a timeline. I tried to keep it simple at first. I walked the perimeter, checked the posts, reinforced the wire where it met the corner near the sidewalk. I even printed a second sign, larger this time, bold black letters on white board, mounted at eye level. Private property. No entry. I stood back, hands on my hips, thinking that would be enough. It lasted less than 48 hours. The next morning, the sign was leaning against the fence like it had been politely moved aside. Not broken, not vandalized, just disregarded. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not anger. Not yet. Just clarity. I started going through the footage more carefully, not just watching but studying. Faces, clothing, body language. The way they looked around before stepping in, like they knew it was wrong but expected no consequences. And then, in clip after clip, I saw her. Not always in the frame, but always nearby. Linda Whitmore. Clipboard in hand sometimes, other times just her phone, walking a few steps ahead of the group like a tour guide. I pulled up one recording from a Saturday morning. Bright sun, clear sky, the kind of day real estate agents love. She stopped near my fence, turned to the couple behind her, and gestured directly toward my rows. Her voice did not carry through the glass, but I could read enough from her lips and the way she smiled. She was selling something, and it was not hers to sell. That was when the pieces locked into place. This was not random. This was not careless neighbors. This was deliberate. A feature. A talking point. Charming organic garden access. I could almost hear her say. I leaned closer to the screen, the faint static buzz of the system filling the room, and watched as the couple followed her gesture, stepped right through the opening in the fence, and into my beds like they had been invited. My jaw tightened, but I did not move. Not yet. Because by then, I had more than suspicion. I had angles. I had timestamps down to the second. I had weeks of footage building a story she did not even realize she was starring in. And the more I watched, the more I understood something simple. She thought nobody was paying attention. That was her first mistake. I waited 2 more days before I stepped outside to meet her in person, not because I needed answers, but because I wanted to see if she would lie to my face the same way she did on camera. The sun was already high, heat rising off the gravel like a shimmer, that dry Texas warmth pressing against your skin in a way that makes everything feel slower, heavier. I found her exactly where I expected, standing at the edge of the cul-de-sac with a couple in their mid-40s, both dressed like they had just stepped out of a catalog, nodding along to whatever she was saying. Her voice carried just enough this time, smooth and practiced, the kind that sells comfort while hiding the details. And over here, she said, gesturing in the direction of my property, you have access to one of the most unique features in the neighborhood. I did not raise my voice. I just walked up, boots crunching against the gravel, each step deliberate. She turned when she heard me, that smile already forming like it had been rehearsed. Ethan, she said, like we were old friends, like she had not been directing strangers into my land for weeks. We were just admiring your garden. The way she said garden made it sound small, temporary, like something decorative instead of something built. I glanced past her at the couple, then back at her. It is not a shared space, I said, keeping my tone even. And there is no access. For a split second, something flickered behind her eyes. Not guilt. Calculation. Then the smile came right back, sharper this time. Oh, of course, she replied, tilting her head slightly. There must have been a misunderstanding. People get curious, you know how it is. I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch just a little longer than comfortable. The faint rustle of dry grass, the distant hum of a passing truck, all of it filling the space she was trying to control. There is no misunderstanding, I said. There is a fence. There were signs. She let out a soft laugh, the kind meant to dismiss without arguing. Well, maybe your signage was not very clear, she said. I would hate for something like that to affect property values around here. There it was. Not an apology. Not even an acknowledgement. Just a subtle shift, turning the problem into my responsibility. I could feel the heat on the back of my neck, the slow rise of something that wanted to push back harder, but I kept it in check. Because I already knew something she did not. I will make it clearer, I said finally, meeting her eyes. She smiled again, satisfied, like she had just won a small, unimportant battle. The couple beside her looked between us, unsure, already losing interest in the tension. Linda turned slightly, ready to move on, to continue her tour like nothing had happened. Enjoy your day, Ethan, she said over her shoulder, already stepping away. I watched her go, the click of her heels fading against the pavement, and then I looked back toward my rows, the quiet lines of green standing there like they always had. Calm, patient, waiting. The thing about people like Linda is they do not stop when you ask them to. They stop when something forces them to. I headed back inside, the cool air hitting my face as the door shut behind me, and walked straight to the monitors. The screens flickered softly, each angle still running, each frame another piece of something bigger taking shape. I pulled up the morning footage, rewound to the moment she pointed toward my land, and let it play again. Then I started labeling files. Dates, times, faces. Because if she wanted to turn my property into part of her story, I was going to make sure the ending belonged to me. The next morning, I did not check the cameras right away. I went outside first. The air had that cool edge it gets just before sunrise burns it off, and the ground still held onto the night's moisture, soft under my boots as I walked the rows. I moved slow, eyes down, taking in every detail the way my father taught me. A bent spear here, a shallow footprint there, the faint drag mark of a shoe that did not belong. You start to recognize damage the same way you recognize handwriting. It has a pattern, a personality. And what I was seeing now was no longer random curiosity. It was routine. I stopped at bed 17, crouched down, and ran my fingers lightly over the soil. Still compacted from yesterday. Not enough time to recover. That meant at least 2 people had stepped through, maybe 3. I stood up, looking toward the fence line where the gap had formed, just wide enough for someone to slip through without thinking twice. The kind of opening that tells people they are allowed, even when they are not. That was on me. I had let that gap sit too long, thinking a sign would be enough. I walked back to the shed, the metal door creaking open with that familiar hollow echo, and grabbed a roll of wire and a handful of new posts. The tools felt solid in my hands, grounding. Something honest about fixing what you can see. I worked the line carefully, pulling the fence tight, securing each post deeper than before, making sure there was no easy way in without making it obvious. By the time the sun cleared the rooftops, the gap was gone. Clean. Closed. Final. I stepped back, wiping my hands on my jeans, and took a long look at the perimeter. It felt different. Not just stronger, but intentional. Like I had finally drawn a line instead of suggesting one. Inside, the monitors flickered quietly, waiting. I poured another cup of coffee, the smell filling the kitchen, and sat down in front of the screens. 6:12 came and went. Nothing. 6:15. Still nothing. For a moment, I thought maybe that was it. Maybe the message had landed. Then at 6:19, the shadow appeared again. Same corner. Same hesitation. But this time, there was no easy entry. I watched as a woman in a light blue jacket stepped up to the fence, looked down at where the opening used to be, and paused. Behind her, 2 others shifted, uncertain. There was a brief moment where they all just stood there, like actors waiting for a cue that never came. Then she did something that told me everything I needed to know. She reached down, grabbed the wire, and pulled. Not hard enough to break it, just enough to test it, to see if it would give. When it did not, she stepped back, glanced over her shoulder, and that was when Linda walked into frame. Same posture. Same calm confidence. She did not even look surprised. She stepped up beside the woman, leaned in slightly, and said something I could not hear. Then, she pointed further down the line, away from where I had just reinforced. A different section, one I had not touched yet. I felt my jaw tighten as I switched camera angles, tracking them as they moved along the fence. There it was again. The pattern. The intent. This was not about a single gap. It was about access. And she was not going to stop just because one door closed. She was already looking for the next one. I leaned back in my chair, the low hum of the system steady, and let out a slow breath. Fixing the fence was never going to be enough. Because the problem was not the opening. It was the person who kept inviting people to find one. And that meant the solution was not out there in the dirt. It was right here, on these screens, building frame by frame into something she could not ignore. By that afternoon, I stopped thinking about fences altogether. Wood, wire, posts. None of it mattered if someone on the other side kept treating my property like a selling feature instead of a boundary. The air inside the house felt different, quieter, like everything had narrowed down to a single point of focus. The monitors glowed steadily, each frame holding a piece of something that was no longer just frustration. It was structure, evidence. I sat there for hours, not rushing, letting the footage play out in real time, then going back and reviewing it again with a different kind of attention. Not as a homeowner, as someone building a case. I started organizing everything. Day by day, angle by angle. I created folders labeled by date, then subfolders for each incident. 6:12, 6:19, 7:03. The timestamps became a rhythm I could almost hear without the speakers on. I paused on faces, zoomed in just enough to identify features without losing clarity. The way people carried themselves, the clothes they wore, even the way they hesitated before stepping in. It all told a story. But the most important part was always the same. Linda, sometimes in the frame, sometimes just off to the side, but always directing, always pointing, always the one who made the decision happen. I pulled up the Saturday clip again, the one with the couple she had been guiding, and slowed it down. Frame by frame. Her hand lifted. Her finger angled toward my rose. Their heads turned. A step forward. Then another. It was clean, clear, undeniable. I leaned back, the chair creaking softly under me, and let out a slow breath. The smell of coffee had gone stale, sitting untouched on the counter, but I did not get up. There was a weight to this moment, a kind of quiet realization settling in. She was not just ignoring boundaries. She was using my land to close deals. That changed everything. I reached for my notebook, the same one I used to track planting schedules and soil conditions, and started writing in it like I would any other project. Dates, times, observations, patterns. I noted how often groups appeared, how many people entered, how long they stayed. I wrote down descriptions of conversations I could not hear, but could read from body language. The way Linda leaned in when she spoke, the way people nodded, the way they smiled when they stepped onto something they thought was included. It was methodical, precise, the same way I had built those beds one row at a time. Around 4 in the afternoon, I made a call. Not to the HOA, not to Linda, someone else. A local attorney I had used once before when I first bought the property, back when I needed everything documented properly. He answered on the third ring, voice calm, steady. I kept it simple. I have a situation, I said, and I have it all on video. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to tell me he understood the weight of that sentence. How much footage? He asked. I glanced at the screens, at the folders already stacking up. Enough to show a pattern, I replied. Another pause. Then, that is usually what matters. I hung up after setting a meeting for later in the week, the quiet click of the phone settling into the room. Outside, the late afternoon light stretched across the rows, long shadows cutting clean lines through the beds. Everything looked calm, untouched, like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better now, because what Linda saw as opportunity, I had turned into documentation. And documentation, when it is built right, does not argue. It does not raise its voice. It just sits there, waiting for the right moment to be seen. The meeting with the attorney was set for Thursday morning, which gave me just enough time to do one thing right. Not rush it. Wednesday came in quiet, the kind of stillness that makes every small sound stand out, from the click of the coffee maker to the faint ticking of the wall clock. I was up before sunrise again, not out of habit this time, but because I wanted to see if anything changed. The monitors lit up the room in soft blue tones, each camera holding its angle like it had been trained for this moment. 6:12 passed. Nothing. 6:15. Still nothing. For a second, I thought maybe word had gotten around. Maybe Linda had decided to adjust, to shift her route, to avoid the one place that was now clearly closed. Then at 6:23, a new movement appeared on the far camera. Different group. Smaller. Just 2 people this time. They approached slower, more cautious, stopping a few feet short of the fence. I leaned forward slightly, watching their hesitation. One of them pointed toward the rows, then back toward the street. The other shook their head. They stayed outside. They did not step in. That alone told me something important. The message was starting to register. Not completely, but enough to create doubt. And doubt is where behavior changes. But Linda did not operate on doubt. She operated on control. I saw her about an hour later, not on camera this time, but through the front window as she walked the sidewalk with another couple. Same posture, same pace, that steady rhythm of someone who believes the environment belongs to them. She did not stop near my fence this time. She kept moving, guiding them further down the street, talking with her hands, pointing at houses instead of land. On the surface, it looked like a shift, like she had moved on. But patterns do not disappear overnight. They adapt. That afternoon, I drove into town for the meeting. The office sat in a low brick building off Main Street, the kind of place that smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. Inside, everything was quiet, controlled, the air cool and steady. I handed over a drive with the footage, labeled, organized, clean. The attorney did not say much at first. He just watched, clip after clip, angle after angle. I sat across from him, hands folded, listening to the soft clicking of the mouse as he moved through the files. After about 15 minutes, he leaned back slightly, eyes still on the screen. "This is consistent," he said. Not impressed, not surprised, just factual. I nodded. "It has been going on for weeks." He clicked through another clip, the one where Linda pointed directly into the rows. He paused it right there, her hand frozen mid-gesture. "And this," he added, tapping the screen lightly. "This is where it changes from a misunderstanding to intent." The word hung in the air for a second. Intent. That was the line. That was what turned something small into something that could not be brushed aside. We talked through options. Not emotional. Not reactive. Just structured. Documentation, formal notice, escalation if needed. Every step laid out like a process, the same way I planned planning cycles. When I left the office, the late afternoon sun hit different. Brighter, sharper, like everything had come into focus. Back home, I walked the fence line one more time, not to fix anything, but to see it the way someone else would. Closed, clear, defined. Then I stepped inside, sat down in front of the monitors, and let the system run. Because at this point, it was no longer about catching her in the act. It was about choosing the exact moment to show everyone else what had already been happening all along. Saturday morning came in louder than usual, not because of noise, but because of anticipation. I could feel it before I even looked at the monitors, that subtle shift in the air like something was about to happen. Open house day. The kind of day Linda thrived on. More foot traffic, more conversations, more chances to turn small details into selling points. I poured my coffee and sat down, the screen glow reflecting faintly off the surface as the system came fully online. 8:45. Nothing yet. 8:52. The first car pulled up. Then another. By 9 o'clock, the street had that low hum of activity, doors closing, voices carrying just enough to blur together. I switched between camera angles, tracking movement, watching patterns form in real time. And then I saw her. Linda stepped out of a black SUV, sunglasses on, clipboard in hand, moving with that same controlled confidence like she owned not just the house she was selling, but everything around it. She greeted each arrival with a smile, a handshake, a small laugh that carried just enough to sound welcoming. I watched as she gathered a group, about 6 people this time, and started walking them down the sidewalk. Not toward my fence at first. She kept it casual, pointing out features of the neighborhood, trees, spacing between homes, little details meant to build a picture. I leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on the screen, because I already knew where this was going. It took less than 3 minutes. They slowed near my property, just enough to shift attention without making it obvious. Linda turned her body slightly, angling herself so she could gesture without fully stopping. Her hand lifted, casual, practiced. The same motion I had seen in clip after clip. Only this time, everything was in place. The fence was sealed. The signs were clear. And the cameras were capturing every angle in perfect detail. I switched to the low camera between rows, the one that caught faces as they approached. The group hesitated at the fence, just like the smaller pair earlier in the week. There was that moment again. Uncertainty. One of them leaned in, reading the sign. Another stepped closer, peering through the wire. Linda said something, her expression calm, reassuring. I could not hear the words, but I did not need to. I had heard them before without sound. The invitation was implied. The permission was assumed. One of the men reached out, fingers brushing the wire, testing it. This time, it did not give. He looked back at Linda. She smiled, but it was tighter now, less certain. And then, something different happened. Instead of redirecting them further down the fence like before, she stayed there. Held the moment. Tried to maintain control. That was the shift. That was the mistake. Because now, it was no longer just a passing gesture. It was visible, intentional, documented from 3 separate angles. I felt my pulse steady, not faster, just focused. Everything I had been collecting, organizing, preparing, it all converged right there in that single moment. I reached over, marked the timestamp, and saved the clip into a new folder. One labeled differently than the others. Not by date, by purpose. Outside, the group eventually moved on, drifting back toward the open house, conversation picking up again as if nothing had happened. Linda lingered for a second longer, glancing once more at the fence, then turned and followed them. I sat back in my chair, the quiet hum of the system filling the room, and took a slow sip of coffee. Because what she thought was just another showing had just become something else entirely. Something complete. I did not go outside right away. That was the difference now. Before, I reacted. Now I waited. I let the footage sit for a few hours, replaying it twice more, not because I needed confirmation, but because timing mattered. By early afternoon, the open house was in full swing. Cars lined both sides of the street, doors opening and closing in steady rhythm, voices overlapping in that polite suburban tone people use when they are trying to imagine themselves living somewhere new. I grabbed the drive, the one with the full sequence already organized, and headed out. The sun hit harder now, baking the pavement, carrying that faint smell of warm asphalt and cut grass through the air. As I walked up toward the house Linda was showing, I could hear her before I saw her. Smooth, controlled, confident. Selling not just a property, but a version of life. I stepped through the front door, the cool air conditioning brushing against my skin, and paused just long enough to take in the room. Hardwood floors. Neutral paint. A staged bowl of lemons on the kitchen counter that smelled just real enough to feel intentional. Linda stood in the living area, mid-sentence, a small group gathered around her. She saw me almost immediately. That flicker again. Recognition first. Then calculation. "Ethan," she said, voice still polished, but tighter around the edges. "Did you come to take a look?" I held up the drive between my fingers, small, simple, almost insignificant. "No," I said calmly. "I came to show something." The room shifted without anyone saying a word. Conversations paused. People turned just enough to notice. Linda let out a small, controlled laugh. "Now is not really the time," she replied, stepping slightly closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound private. "We can talk later." I shook my head once. "This involves what you have been telling people about my property," I said, keeping my tone even, not raised, just clear. That was enough. The word property carries weight when you say it like that. A few of the guests exchanged glances. One of them, the same man from the morning who had tested the fence, shifted his stance, recognition settling in. Linda's smile held, but it was different now. Fixed. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," she said again, the same line, same tone. I stepped past her, not rushing, just moving with purpose, and set the drive on the kitchen island next to the staged lemons. "There is no misunderstanding," I said. "There is a pattern." One of the guests spoke up, cautious. "What kind of pattern?" I looked at him, then back at Linda. "The kind that is recorded from 3 angles, with timestamps." The room went quiet in a way that felt heavier than silence. Not awkward. Focused. Linda's posture shifted, just slightly, shoulders tightening as she realized this was not something she could redirect with a smile. I continued, still calm. Guests being guided to a private property. Repeatedly. With clear signage and a closed fence. I let that sit for a second, then added, "Including this morning." That was the moment it landed. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just undeniable. The man from earlier frowned, looking from me to Linda. "You told us we could walk over there," he said, not accusing, just stating what he believed was true. Linda opened her mouth, then closed it, the words not coming as easily this time. I did not need to say anything else. The footage existed. The timeline was clear, and everyone in that room could feel the shift, the slow unraveling of something that had been presented as normal. I picked up the drive again, holding it loosely. "My attorney will be sending formal notice," I said, not as a threat, just as a next step. Along with the documentation. Outside, a car door slammed, the sound echoing faintly through the house, but inside, no one moved. Because in that moment, what had been a selling point had just become a liability, and Linda knew it. I did not stay long after that. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to explain. The air in that house had changed, and everyone felt it. Conversations did not pick back up the same way, voices lower now, careful, like people were recalibrating what they thought they understood. I stepped outside, the heat hitting me again, steady and familiar, and walked back down the sidewalk without looking over my shoulder. I did not need to. The shift had already happened. By Monday morning, the formal notice went out. Clean, direct, backed by documentation that did not leave room for interpretation. My attorney handled the language, the structure, the exact phrasing that turns a situation into a record. Trespass facilitation. Misrepresentation of property features. Repeated unauthorized access. each line tied to timestamps, dates, and still frames pulled straight from the footage. When it was delivered, I was in the field, checking irrigation lines, the soft hiss of water moving through the system steady in the background. My phone buzzed once. A short message. Receive. That was it. No argument. No pushback. Just acknowledgement. Over the next few days, the neighborhood adjusted in small, noticeable ways. Foot traffic near my fence dropped to zero. Not reduced. Gone. People walked the sidewalk, glanced over sometimes, but kept their distance. The sign stayed in place. The fence held firm. And for the first time in weeks, the early mornings returned to what they used to be. Quiet. Predictable. The kind of stillness that lets you hear the wind move through the rows without interruption. I still check the cameras. Habit mostly. But the footage changed. Empty frames where there used to be movement. Clean soil where there used to be footprints. The system kept running, but it was no longer collecting incidents. It was confirming absence. On Thursday afternoon, I saw Linda again. Not up close. Across the street, stepping out of her car. No clipboard this time. No group. Just her, moving a little faster than usual, head slightly down, like she was focused on something ahead of her instead of everything around. She did not look toward my property. Not once. That was new. A week later, the listing for that house was updated. I saw it online by accident, scrolling through local listings the way people do when they are curious about what is happening around them. The description had changed. The language was tighter, more careful. No mention of shared features. No vague references to access or community charm tied to anything beyond the actual lot. Just facts. Square footage. Appliances. Lot size. It read like something that had been reviewed line by line. I closed the page and set the phone down, the faint reflection of the screen fading as it went dark. Outside, the late afternoon light stretched across the rows again, the same long shadows cutting through the beds, clean and undisturbed. I walked the fence one more time, not because I expected to find anything, but because that is what you do when something matters. You check it. You maintain it. You respect it. At the corner post, I stopped and looked out over the field, the lines running straight. Each bed exactly where it was supposed to be. 5 years of work, still intact. Still mine. The camera stayed up, not as a warning, but as a reminder. Not everything needs to be loud to be effective. Some things just need to be seen at the right moment. Because in the end, she did not stop because I told her to. She stopped because there was proof she could not explain away. And once something like that exists, it does not matter how confident you sound when you speak. It matters what can be shown when it counts.